Hello, good morning in Austria. Welcome to the second day of the symposium Expanded Animation. We kicked off the symposium yesterday with the panel Artist Position, contributions by Reka Bucci, Max Hattler and Eric O. Today we have a very ambitious program. In total on this symposium we have more than 20 speakers. Today we will start with the panel Real Time, featuring artists from Austria and also from Germany. And we have the pleasure to welcome these guys here in our studio at Hagenberg, followed by a discussion concerning on this, tackling this topic, art and industry and animation. And in the afternoon, we will kick off the pre-forum, the discussion with the prize winners in the category computer animation, followed by the award ceremony and the pre-forum discussion. Very late, there is the online screening, Electronic Theater. It's the selection of the prize-winning projects of this year's category computer animation. So it's a very exciting program, so stay tuned and join us on Facebook. With any further ado, I hand over to my colleague Michael.
Yeah, thanks for the introduction. I'm Michael. I'm one of the co-organizers of this symposium. I have now the pleasure to announce the first panel of this day called Real Time, and it consists of 4 talks. The panel itself is subdivided into 2 sessions. So we have 2 talks by Depart and Friedrich Kirschner. Then we'll have a break, and after the break there will be a talk by Total Refusal and Johannes Pfeiffer. Very important, after each talk there is a Q&A session where we pick up the questions raised by the audience in our live chat. So I highly encourage you to ask questions, and in these Q&A sessions we'll discuss them. Okay, so let's begin with the first talk of the real-time panel. The first speakers are Leonhard Lass and Gregor Ladenhau from the art collective Depart, who will talk about their project with the title Entropy Gardens, and this project also has received an honorary mention at this year's Ars Electronica Festival, so congratulations. And without further ado, please welcome Leonhard and Gregor.
Hello, good morning. We are Depart. This is Leonhard, I'm Gregor. We are very happy to be here. Thank you for the invitation. We also want to say thank you for the honorary mention. We are very happy about this. I just want to talk a little bit about what we did in general in the last few years. You might be wondering why we chose a verb as our artist collective title and not a noun, which is maybe a bit uncommon. But I think the case was that we chose this because we are constantly moving forward in our work, and we try to not be stuck in a specific place. So to depart is actually our motto. That's why we chose it maybe. What you also can see here a little bit is projects that we have done in the past. I may refer to them quickly. So this is one piece that was called Asphodel. Asphodel was a project we made in Barcelona when Leo was still living there. It was still in Flash, kind of audiovisual poetry thing that we made with a lot of graphics, sound, and poetry in the images. The next one is a project we made for the MAC at the Soundframe Festival in Vienna. The next one is Delta Orige, which was also part of the Soundframe Festival in Vienna. What you can see here is a piece called the Cloud Chamber Diaries that we made for the Austrian Culture Forum in New York. Maybe one thing that is common with all of these is that we use natural elements in them. We really have this focus on using a lot of different aspects of aesthetics, and of course nature is a very important aspect of aesthetics because the forms and relations that are represented in nature is something that transfers into a work a lot. Also, as you can see, maybe our works sometimes appear a little dark, and we already have been awarded with attributes like Gothic and stuff, which we of course not really think our work to be part of. But yeah, I think it's sometimes more that we try to focus people on specific elements more, and that may be the case that we get into this contrast heavy things a lot. As you can see, so this is maybe on the lighter side, and yeah, the others are more pieces that were in dark spaces as well. So we a lot of times our works are very site-specific, so we concentrate on how we could fit something in a specific place. For example, Delta Aurige was in the Otterkringer Brauerei in Vienna, large space, of course, and a high space. That's why we chose this upright projection, and a lot of these works as well have something in common, which is systematics in kind of clockwork systematics. So they have an internal mechanism that gives them the opportunity to change a lot of times and modify and modulate themselves, and give them this. Yeah, a lot of modular aspects, because we don't work a lot in linear time lines, but mostly in very fragmented timelines, and we want to give the viewers a new experience every time that they are confronted with them. Our latest piece, or one of our latest pieces, is the Entropy Gardens, which we were awarded the honorary mention at the Ars Electronica Festival, and in this case it's our second VR piece that we made. And we were focusing on gardening, or actually more the aspect of land art in it. So we have this garden system that is actually able to present the viewers with a new experience a lot of times, because there are a lot of random elements in it as well. And also the interaction via the view is a very important part of it. And I think Leo will tell you a bit more about this now.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, also just one thing to add, thanks Gregor. I think there is this common denominator here as well, that is, we're interested in this threshold between nature and culture. That's why there are so many natural elements, because of their complexity, that is very tricky to replicate in a digital world. And also how all those natural given things become part of our culture, of our symbolism, of our mythology, and of our mystics. And one thing that I usually start presentations with is this very old icon, almost, it was a sticker basically in the very beginning when we started working on, but it's just so fitting for this presentation now. So we are interested in this, what happened here. It's an accident, and the system reacted to it, and something new came out of it immediately, because there are some rules to it, and it just behaves, and new forms emerge. And what we are also interested in is this ambivalence and this connection to language. So you see, we are interested in poetry, and we like those word games. And as Gregor already mentioned, our last work is the Entropy Gardens, and it's this kind of a virtual horticulture, where we tried to get this analogy of the garden as an analogy of our work in general. So we are constantly working with this system that have kind of an autonomy, and where we are the kind of gardeners that try to shape it in a way, but also leave certain kinds up to the system, up to, I don't know, up to the simulation. So we are not interested in total control. We are very interested in losing control sometimes. And maybe the starting point was this idea of this poetic organism that is also a constant in our work. Try to figure out a system, an audiovisual system, that uses a language that is poetic. And like a garden, the Entropy Gardens wants to become such a poetic organism. So in the beginning, there is, of course, this question, what do we actually want from a garden? Why is this such a huge thing in all cultures? It's one of the oldest art forms, and you find it in every country in the world, basically. And in this slide, you see two stark, contrasting examples. The first is Versailles, so the French tradition of gardening, and the second is a Japanese garden. And what do we portrait with a garden? Or is the garden a portrait of something? In the first, it appears it's the portrait of man and of humankind controlling the nature. In the second, it's more like a portrait of nature itself. It's also a statement of humility rather than control. So the other huge difference here is the first is very graphical and ornamental in a way, while the second one is extremely abstract, and it tries to get an essence out of nature and not so much replicate it as well. And then there is a third very important thing that we use the garden for, and this is a botanical garden, where science comes into play. So a botanical garden almost works like an archive, like a museum, where you accumulate plants that wouldn't be naturally together, where you label them, where you can look at them in isolation. And all these aspects and all these extremes, I think, demark the space where we started to explore. So can there be such a thing that unifies these extremes, that maybe transitions between those states? And from this last bit of this archiving, we find a stark similarity to what's happening right now. Humankind always was in this position to trying to grasp everything around it. And nowadays we find this huge archive of like digitized plants. Right now we are just digitizing our world. And we find these archives with plants in 3D models of everything. And we can put them together in new arrangements. They look photorealistic, but they are completely detached from reality already. And these are our building blocks. So we started with these archives. And if there is one common denominator, again, in the gardening tradition, then it's the one of the enclosure. So the most prominent garden reference maybe in our culture is the paradise, of course. And the paradise by etymology already means like a marked off space, so a walled garden basically. And this is true for almost all the cultures. A garden always means this is a kind of encircled space. And from this, we also can feel that there is a huge connection to mystical places, to religious spaces where rituals maybe happen. And this is where the concept of the temenos comes in. And the temenos is always a space marked off from usual use, and reserved for something special. And it's very close to something from game theory, where the magic circle from Johann Huizinga comes into play. And Huizinga basically says there is no real difference between a tennis court or a religious space, a church, for instance. It's all you get rid of the actual rules of reality. New rules are in place. Everybody that enters this space knows the rules and plays along them. And it's like a encapsulation within reality where some new rules apply. And this closeness to virtual reality as a medium interests us a lot, where you put on this device and all of a sudden you're in a space that has rules that you have to play with, or that seem to behave in a different fashion than reality does. So the next step here is, of course, this outside experience. When we are talking about ritual, it's impossible to neglect the fact that the visitor with the VR goggle is still present in the real world and is present in a very performative way. So he is kind of this shaman that manipulates only with his gaze or with her gaze this world that has some kind of power and a direct interaction to this virtual world. And this is also something that we try to include in our work, thinking about the outside view of this and how this visitor in this parallel world becomes a performer in the actual reality. The thing that we started out with, this analogy for being for our work in itself, is highly related to these three pictures as well. The first is again Versailles, and what you see when you enter Versailles is these super geometrical plant shapes, and of course they don't happen naturally. So you need to set or get a system of agents in place that maintain this structure, right? And here, this is of course many people that are there every day maintaining this. On the next slide, again, the Japanese garden has something very similar. They included it into the ritual of the garden, like the Zen gardens where the monks are there and practicing their meditation basically while doing garden work and also maintaining these shapes. And the third is support structures. So also from a Japanese garden where they build, when winter is coming, they build these support structures just to keep the branches in shape over the winter when snow loads are expected. And what's so apparent here is how dominant those structures become, and also how the Japanese, in this case, think about making this aesthetic. So it's not just something random that would support the tree, but this is a beautiful sculpture almost on top of it. And we are very interested in making those agent systems that maintain the structure, the formal structure of this system, making them visible. And these are kind of rituals of control, like these agents in the system that maintain the shapes. And we have something very interesting also from another perspective, the tree as a hierarchical system. Like what you see here are the tree of science from Ramon Llull, and all those endeavors to categorize knowledge or human ideas into tree structures. And this parallel play of, on the one hand, being a natural phenomenon, and on the other hand, being a device to structure our knowledge. This is very interesting. Could we overlap this? And how could we overlap this? And of course, this is also found in, like again, game theory, because I started out with that topic as well. So for all kind of things, we use tree structures to show knowledge or categorize knowledge on relations. And this is just a small screenshot of how we work in the background as well. We have, of course, many elements in our work that need to react and interact. And this becomes very complex at times, but this is also why we love it so much. So when we built this system, we set out all the elements, and you see, I mean, the white ones are the basic ones that you will immediately recognize. So there are rocks and plants, and there is something that like just marks off the environment, like wind, times, the light system, terrain, the terrain and system, and they all have states and they all interact, of course. But then in this complex map, you have to find your place as an artist. You have to know where you take over control, where you introduce like these dramaturgical decisions, how you are going to edit this thing that would actually just behave and edit it down to something that makes sense in a chronology. And what you have seen in the very top is something that we are also interested in is what's the observing system? Can we introduce something that makes this system self-observatory, basically? And in this case, there was something that fell into our hands almost, because we were reading about Japanese gardens a lot. There is the haiku poetic system that is very related to nature observations. And it's actually just a very simple system of rhythm. And we use this system as a kind of entity that is in the world and that constantly almost observes what's going on and puts it into small haikus that again relate to the objects that it finds. And this would look something like this. So
the moment when outside became inside, two birds with one stone. A crystal whisper, ambushes in glass houses, only a stone's throw away.
So whenever there is language, some forms are generated that become part of this garden again. But in the end, they are still these, on the border of being those diagrammatic structures.
Fists full of thistles, and mists filled with missing links. Speaking of places. And even the moon borrows its light from the sun, a pair of shadows.
A head shaped like spheres is what I'd like to have now.
Yes, and finally, we just want to show a bit of it, just to give you a better idea. Now that we talked so much about theoretically, of course, there is never a way to document the VR piece, and I hope you all get the chance to see it. But these are just a few scenes. The way it works actually is that every time you enter this space, it's kind of different. You will have different arrangements. You should get this feeling of that your surrounding is connected to you. You are kind of an influencing factor like the wind. You can interact. Plants and arrangements are reacting to your presence, but there is no game-like interaction. There's nothing that you have to achieve, that you have to trigger, that you have to do. You can also be just a completely passive observer.
My gaze tunnels through brushwood, forests stuffed with night.
Heave high the fences, but keep the garden low.
So as you can maybe imagine, one of the challenges in a piece like this is as well to find the right balance between situations that are more attention-grabbing and situations that are more kind of ambient situations where you can look around a lot and explore, because we have to use these kind of micro-dramaturgy moments to give the piece, of course, some sort of structure, but to be able to keep it as loose as possible as well on the same hand. So this is really a balance that is kind of difficult to achieve. Also, yeah, as Leo mentioned, we try to avoid to give the viewers the impression that they are in a game, that they have to achieve a specific thing now, because we actually want to encourage people to get into this state of more of a wandering state where you start to experience things without even trying to label or reflect on them in linguistic terms.
Tectonic tactics, breaths in the smooth of mountains.
Also, of course, one of the main tasks for us always is we use a lot of synthetic elements, or mostly synthetic elements. So, of course, these are kind of photorealistic representations of nature. Also, some of the sounds that we use are actual sounds that are recorded, but a lot of the sounds are synthetic as well. So to find the actual perfect mapping for sounds and images to overlap in a way that they are believable is also one of our main goals.
Yes, and maybe to finish this off and also like refer to our most current work, we are interested in these vague objects, in these objects that do not have a clear border. There is this cloud theme that is apparent in our work for a long time. So an object that you have the feeling of when the more you zoom in, the less clear it becomes where the object actually ends. An object that is made up of super complex structures and that has behavior on its own. And this work that we are showing right now in Linz at the Hauptplatz, the transient shadows, is a formal experiment also on this threshold. So we are relating to the Pestsäule, that is basically a pillar of smoke, and we are interested in this. It's a Baroque style that tries to depict a theme that is completely ephemeral, completely bodiless, and gets it into these heavy shapes like marble. And our work is exactly on this threshold again, of something that is consisting of cloud, of smoke simulations, of airflow simulations, and we try to transform this into these heavy stone-like, rock-like sculptures and freeze them for a second and look how they would appear as a monument. And I hope you have the chance to be in Linz today. Today, 3 times at 8, 9, and 10, we have our performance at the Hauptplatz, and I hope to see you there.
Yeah, also, I just thought of a situation yesterday where someone pointed out to me that she felt that the situation on Hauptplatz with the play column and our projection on the Kunstuniversität is kind of overwhelming, and we use these overwhelming situations a lot in our work. And she compared it to the fact that Baroque aesthetics are also very overloaded and overcrowded and overwhelming a lot. And so I found this kind of funny because, as I was talking about in the beginning, we were labeled with goth sometimes. So yeah, as you can see, maybe we're not a very gothic. We're more, and we used this. I think once before already. We labeled it Baroque and roll. So yeah, please come to the Hauptplatz at 8, 9, or 10. It's a performance lasts about 10 minutes, and yeah, it's very site specific. So yeah, hope to see you there.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you for this engaging presentation. We are now moving to the Q&A session, and we've received several interesting questions from the audience. So Harry Wally asks, last week I visited a walled garden built in the 1820s, which since the 1920s has fallen into total disrepair. How far will the entropy in our garden go when left unattended over time?
A really super question, because this is a question that that is in our mind all the time. Like, what is the actual? How can we depict digital decay? And is there an equivalence to this very interesting thing that is decay in the analog? There is also this saying, I think, by Lebbeus Woods, the most interesting aspect of this building is the state of decay it is in. And we love that because this is such a huge quality of the analog that once you set something there, it doesn't stay that way. It just falls apart and actually becomes interesting in a way because it gets patina and so on. And it's very hard to achieve something like that in the digital realm because there is no natural decay. I mean, there are glitches, there are data losses, there is like the loss of mapping tables. There is another thing, but it's not really an equivalent. It's not an analogy to this phenomenon that we have, where actually a living system is working on it. And in this case, if left unattended, probably nothing will happen, but the computer will decay sooner or later, and just the entropy gun will fall off. But this is how it's structured right now. It doesn't have to be that way. We needed for a certain kind of exhibition properties to have a clear time frame with a clear dramaturgy, so like 10 minutes, for instance. And it just restarts from the beginning. But the way it is built in the background could be entirely open. So it could potentially run forever and generate things forever. But it's always the tricky part where you do this brutal thing of editing, where you are trying to achieve one very specific focused experience rather than leave an open system on its own that might not always be interested, because it might be the case that in these 10 minutes you don't see anything because it's night and you're in an empty garden, for instance. So it's a compromise. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Another question by Brigitta Hosea. Would you describe your work as poetics of VR?
In general, I think we talk about our work as hyperpoetics. So this is our tradition, is definitely we see our work as poetics. VR is just one medium that we thought very fitting for those two projects. But our last project again was not a VR project. So we are very flexible in what kind of media and what kind of software also we are using. And we always decide based on the actual project and the actual thing we are trying to achieve. So
I think it's also specific, as I was talking about before, a specific state of mind and also a specific set of maybe emotions or feelings that we try to evoke, which are very present in the realm of poetry. And so that's what we also try to achieve, these moments of existing where you feel a very specific but very intense feeling or space or state of mind.
Mm. And we are also very particular about language. We see our audiovisual language as some equivalent to like a poetic written language. We try to create these structures where all the elements kind of behave like a poem would behave, where they all interrelate and give this kind of meta images that are not just visual images, but audiovisual images, like multimodal poetry in a way. This is what we're trying to achieve. So the meta project in those 20 years that we're working together is to develop this, I think, hyperpoetic deep art language that consists of multimodal realities. Yes.
And another question, so the garden in your installation appears to be highly dynamic. How do you maintain the consistency and reproducibility of the experience? Or is this aspect of any importance at all?
You want to?
Yeah, it's always something that we discuss a lot between ourselves as well, because we have these we have these two poles. One is of course order, and the other is chaos. And where do we position the piece inside this, and how much importance do we give them in terms of giving the system the possibility to structure itself, and how is that even possible by programming it? And because in let's say nature, there are so many factors that come into play that are even beyond our grasp, because of course we have science and we try to measure everything, but we cannot know all of it. And quantum mechanics is something that we still try to get a grasp. So what we do is just a very, very small endeavor to give an experience that somehow fits into this. So yeah, I think the order state is something that we need because I think that's actually the fight between us, because I always want to have it like maybe even more dynamic or give it even more chance to be very chaotic, and Leo always tries to calm me down and says like, no, we cannot do this because then it gets totally out of control. And this is it's maybe that's even a nice representation that we are two people and try to have this chaos and order thing going.
Yeah, but in general, consistency comes out of the system. So this is nothing that we have to be concerned of. It's just, is this consistency always interesting? And where do we need to break out of it? And what we usually do is when we say, okay, no, just letting the system play out doesn't work. It's just not maintaining interests or focus for a long time. We built a metastructure on it, and we try to keep it as loose as possible. And the one we had for the, or at least the conceptual one we had for the entropy garden, like built a metastructure that basically is like a mental slider between order and chaos, static and dynamic. And that again, of course, has influence on many parameters in these actual arrangements. And then there is again time coming in that has temporal changes. And so many of those systems also overlap, and that's where the complexity comes out of. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yes.
So another question which is related to the previous one, what are the boundaries of the garden? Are there any form of boundaries?
Yeah, well, you can see them sometimes when we zoom out a bit. This is also a point of discussion because, it's a technical problem as well, of course. But every garden has to have some boundaries because otherwise it wouldn't be a garden, of course. And so in this case, it's I don't know how many meters. I think I don't know. 15 by 15.
Yeah, it's 50 by 50. It's an arbitrary choice. But I think it's important also to have this because, as I said in the presentation, this is one of the core features of a garden. It has to be an enclosed space. And it's also fine with this relation to these simulation spaces that are quite common, where you just have like a body within that, a simulation happens. And in this case also, if you fly out of the garden and this happens because you are like the wind, you can go airborne, then you see this space very clearly. But within this space, so many different garden arrangements can overlap, and you have a density of different realities within this very tiny space. And I think this is also a valid relation to what an actual garden is. And of course, like from a technical perspective, it of course also helps to get rid of complexity of having a marked space to deal with, rather than having an open world system where you could just go anywhere. Mm.
Okay, so another question, of course. What are the limitations of the digital domain? So which aspects of a garden are hard or even impossible to transfer? So when you have something like in real space and try to transfer it in the virtual space.
Yeah, maybe this is also a good point to start talking about sound. I haven't talked about sound too much because this, I mean, especially VR and sound has a lot of tricky parts still, where we are not satisfied, where we just use what we have, but we know that this cannot be the limit yet.
Yeah, I mean, of course, this is it's what we do is something that's related to a real thing, but of course it's virtual and it's an artistic expression, and of course in a garden normally maybe other than. You wouldn't have maybe some people have it in their garden, a sound system, but you would have totally different sounds in a garden existing. I mean, there would be a lot of ambient, very small sounds, maybe if there are insects and animals around, but naturally you wouldn't have any harmony occurring. Maybe if there are some, if you have sound installations in your garden, like wind installations or anything. But to give this as I was talking about, this feeling or emotional thing, sound or music is very important in every aspect of audiovisual arts. Also the spatial orientation is a problem. I mean, that's a special problem in VR anyway, which is not really so satisfactory yet, also on a technical level. So I guess we try to keep it as open as possible, but still have these very impressionist and we call it impressure moments, where you are kind of forced onto something as well.
But maybe one thing that is also important, we never tried to replicate any specific garden. It was never about that. It was about this analogy of the garden, like creating something that works like this poetic organism that we think a garden actually is. So this kind of intensification of nature into something, into an essence of it that has some other formal properties maybe. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so one last question. We are nearly out of time. You created many projects in the years. Did you develop some kind of a design tool set or some established procedures, design procedures that you use in every project, or is each project something completely different?
You just entered our weak spot. No, we actually we do something new every time, and it's of course part of the problem of efficiency, but it's how we work and how we like it. So when we feel like, for instance, this project on the Hauptplatz right now, it wouldn't have been possible with the tools that we used in this project. It was Unity before, if we name a few things, for the VR, because it's just, it worked for us. And for the thing on the Hauptplatz, real-time systems just didn't work. So we needed something more complex to get this granularity and this complexity out of it. So we switched to a different tool set. And it's kind of always the case. So there's not one thing that came through. But Unity, for instance, is maybe the one that we used most, but this is also just twice. So, and I mean, there was, all kinds of stuff. We started out with processing, with Maximum Speed NATO, and Jitter, PD Jam, V4. It has all been there. Flash, it was the very first. And we just move along. And this is completely ineffective, and we know that. But it's also, I think, part of that we, at least in some manner, could get rid of these aesthetics that usually software forces onto you. Mm-hmm. So we have the feeling that throughout all these different projects that have very different aesthetics, if you just look at screenshots, we maintain the kind of style that is very clearly depart. Mm-hmm. And that we are not so much showing like the look of software. Yeah.
I think so. You could actually say that we developed design tools in our minds. So this is the way we work together and the way we talk about things, the influences we have, our approach. So maybe we really sharpened our mind design tools in a way a lot. And for me, it's the same with Leo. Like whenever I approach a project, it's I might think of a specific instrument or synthesizer that I want to use a lot, but then again, it sometimes just happens that along the way I stumble across something else, and some projects, they just force a specific approach onto you maybe, and that's I think that's maybe one of our most important mind design tools, is that we try to stay as open as well as possible, and to really adapt to the situation.
Yes, thank you for your interesting insights, the answers that you gave, and the presentation. We are actually out of time now, unfortunately, and I would like to thank you for the things that you said today.
Thanks for the invitation.
Thanks.
Okay, so we continue our panel with a talk by Friedrich Kirschner in a couple of minutes. So stay tuned. Thank you.
Dankeschön.
Dankeschön.
Hi, welcome back to the real-time panel. We're now having the second talk, and this will be done by the very talented and multi-talented artist Friedrich Kirschner, who is a theater director, software developer, and also a professor at the University of Performing Arts Ernst Busch in Berlin. And in this talk, we'll discuss systemic questions for participatory theoretical experiences. And once again, very important, we have a live chat in YouTube, so I kindly ask the audience to raise questions and that we can have an interesting Q&A session afterwards. So, thank you.
Hello, my name is Friedrich, and I'm streaming this actually, recording this actually from Linz. My name is Friedrich, and I'm a professor for digital media at the University of Performing Arts Ernst Busch in Berlin. Yeah, thank you for tuning in, I guess, and thank you for joining me. And I would quickly like to give you an idea of what we are usually doing. And we use all sorts of media, both old and new, and some that some people might like to call digital, and some that some people might like to call analog. It's a bit of a weird term for us because in the end, really the thing is that we're mainly about people, and about a whole bunch of people that are in the same room together and that interact with each other and that discuss stuff with each other. And it's we try to design the experiences that we design mostly in a way that they don't need us more or less at all, and unless something breaks, but then we try to make them not need us even if something breaks. So yeah, it's mostly about people make-believing together, enacting different situations and different roles, things that are familiar to them, things that are unfamiliar to them, you know, like performing, like becoming someone else, becoming something else, and being in a situation with other people where you all look at each other and then you kind of act it out, you know. Before I'm going to talk about the confusion that reigns within me, I would very much like to quickly give you an idea of what the sort of performances look like that we usually do if there's no worldwide pandemic going on. And for that, I'm going to show you a quick video of some of the works that the students have done last year as part of our program. and also given the format of this talk, that experience is unfortunately no longer tenable, at least for the next couple of months. Theaters in specifically in Germany and probably also in most other places around the world will have to think of different ways in which they can engage with their audience. Before I'm going to talk about the confusion that reigns within me, because in the end what we're trying to work on is always a sort of understanding of concepts that are beyond like just sensory perception. So one of the things that theater allows us to do is to create spaces in which the complexity of certain topics can be experienced together. And in the differences of these experiences, in those tiny gaps between what one person has experienced and what the other person has experienced, I feel therein lies the complexity of concepts that are broadly discussed, but not like tangible, not touchable. Especially if the people that have shared their experience in that room have not just listened to the same thing, but they've interacted with each other. They've discussed things with each other. They've acted on these concepts, with their ideas of these concepts. And then those ideas of the concepts clash. And I think that is where these differences become super pronounced, because then suddenly within that space that we create, those different concepts actually play with each other. And there's a negotiation going on of what any of these concepts actually mean. So we do this to discuss concepts that are hard or even impossible to perceive with our senses. Nature, as you might have seen in the video before, or capitalism, or I don't know, rescuing people that are drowning, or fascism. And for the talk today, I would like to talk about one specific project that we did, that was that was happening in real space, and that 40 people were playing at the same time. This was happening in a theater in Aalborg in Denmark. And so during that performance, something super weird but also interesting happened, where one of the two, so there were two groups of players, and they both played in like a bunker, and one of those bunkers ran out of food, and so all of the participants from one bunker had to become refugees in the other bunker. And so a refugee crisis started to happen, and the people who were running the second bunker, they kind of didn't know how to deal with that. And so what they were doing was they were cordoning off an area of their bunker, and they tried to make sure that their people got like food first, and then they sanctioned the refugees. So they tried to make sure that they only get rationed amounts of food, and they were not allowed to steal anything, and they were highly suspicious of the newcomers to like not really fit in, even though these were all people that supposedly knew some of them knew each other before they went to this performance together. And then suddenly there was this this civil unrest. Like, people started to protest against their leaders, and they started to have riots, and they would steal food for the refugees. And it was this really amazingly complex and super scary situation. I remember at some point one of the players would come to us. We were not like playing with them. We were just there to make sure that everybody knows what's going on. And they were asking us if there were weapons or any way of, like shooting and killing people. And that was kind of intense, and we kind of didn't really know how to deal with that. And we were lucky because we let it play out, and we saw that the people who were kind of undermining their own government found interesting ways and solutions around the problem, and circumvented most of the really harsh rules that the very pragmatic government had set into place. Before, I'm going to talk about the confusion that reigns within me. I guess what I'm trying to ask myself is how would these theater pieces that we have created with the real space and real people and face-to-face interaction in mind, what would they look like in virtual spaces? And can we, is the title of the talk really true? Is all of the knowledge that we have of virtual spaces that we now bring into our social everyday, is that knowledge really still valid? Is it still something that works the same way that it used to work before? Now that is a question that I have been asking myself for quite some time now, because I've always felt that there's like a huge amount of overlap between these two areas, and obviously being able to do theater plays in virtual spaces and involving the audience would broaden and widen the amount of people that could take part in theatrical experiences like that. But it kind of never really panned out that way. Like playing video games somehow never seemed particularly strongly connected to having theater experiences. And I never really quite got an idea of why that would be. And so funnily enough, I was working on a video game for that theatrical experience in Denmark that I was showing you. And I would like to show you a quick trailer of what that would have looked like if I would have done it like the traditional way, where we just take the experiences of a theater play, of a participatory theater play, and we write down some conversations that we had overheard, and we use a whole bunch of code that we had already created for that specific experience, for the interfaces that people were using in that experience. And then we make like a video game out of that, like a musician who would have played a concert and then did a recording and then remastered it and then kind of brought that out as a CD or like a vinyl or something like that. And so that would have looked something like that. But something started to change significantly in the way that I started to see the distinction between video game spaces and theatrical spaces when we had to move all of our teaching to like virtual platforms. So one of the virtual platforms that we used was Zoom, which I'm sure a lot of you are quite familiar with. But very, very quickly, we started to also experiment with having like online multiplayer environments that people could just hang out in, you know, make their own little avatars and then be in that environment, similar to the one that you saw beforehand in my talk. And then something clicked the moment we started to implement a light switch in a multiplayer environment. So we started building these like super basic multiplayer environments together with the students, so they would get the code and understand how all of this works and how like Amazon Web Services work and how to host multiplayer environments in the cloud. And we started with a very basic room where, you know, 2 people, 3 people, whatever many people can be at the same time, and they can then also manipulate properties of that room. And so one of the first things that we had as code was that it was possible for us to manipulate light by just going to the computer and turning off the light, which is not a particularly amazing thing to show. This was just to show the potential of what would happen if this was something that you could do in a multiplayer environment, and how you might be able to use this like as a theatrical thing. And that is actually when something super interesting happened, because the moment we had the first test server up and running with the light switch enabled, people were heading for the light switch and going like crazy on the light switch. Like everybody wanted to switch the light on and off. And it's just a light switch. I mean, nobody would do that in an actual physical room, right? Like you wouldn't go into a theater and turn on the lights or turn off the lights and be all giddy about the fact that you could do that. And we started talking, I think probably a lot, maybe too much, about what was the difference between a light switch in a virtual space and a light switch in real space. And we specifically started talking about the difference in rules and how they're implemented in real space and in physical space. You see, there's a huge similarity actually between theater directors and game designers, and that is that they expend an enormous amount of energy to shape the player's experience and to make sure that the player is having an experience that the designer or the director intended. What they're trying to do is make sure that there's a somewhat narrow set of possibilities that people can try out and play around with. And so we usually, in virtual spaces, we try to put the rules of what you can and cannot do in code. So as a game designer, we would observe the player's behavior, the fact that everybody is running for the light switch and turn it on and off, and then probably change the code so that you could only turn on and off the light switch every 5 seconds, so that people stop spamming the light switch. But in real life, we don't do fingerprint sensors on light switches. Actually, not, at least we don't do that yet. To make sure that you can only turn it on and off every 5 seconds. But what we do is we just say, people chill, like stop it. It's fine. We got it that you can turn on and off the light, but now stop, because we want to do different things. And we start to negotiate how fun it is to actually turn on and off the lights all the time, to how fun all of the other things are that you could do, either with lights on or lights off. And so that is a social negotiation, and that social negotiation is a core part of theater. And in virtual spaces, we often don't let people have these social negotiations because we put it in code, and the code dictates what you can do and what you can't do. And I think that is where originally my confusion came from, that for the longest time in our participatory theater experiences, we had used computers as rigid bodies where we used them in places where we didn't want people to change the rules, because computers have very specific cause and effect relationships. Like you build an interface, you build a small system, and you feed that system inputs and it generates specific outputs. And it's not trivial to change that within like the setting of a theater play. And so computers were these very rigid places and spaces, and we used them whenever we wanted something specific to happen, when people were doing something specific. And now all of a sudden everything got turned upside down, and suddenly we're looking at computers as our main space, and we're trying to find the soft social fabric where we can negotiate if it's okay to do something, where we want to have like a base of knowledge of people on how to behave in specific situations. Like, what is it that they want to experience, and can they negotiate how to behave so that experience becomes more plausible and more possible. This is the actual meaning of the sentence that I was trying to have as my talk, is that everything old is new again is probably not meant in a way that all the things that we did in the mid-2000s and 2010s in virtual spaces are now relevant again, but that now we have to renegotiate all of the things that we want to do in virtual spaces, and we have to start having social discussions and negotiations about how we want to structure these spaces. And we have to start building relationships and trust with specific spaces and have rules that are not necessarily put in code, but that are put in like just good manners and the way that we want to interact with each other in specific situations. Because in the end, theater is just that. Theater is just like a contract between the people that come into a theater and they watch something going on stage, and they're not jumping up and interrupting what is going on. And without that social contract, theater would not be able to happen. And so I feel like what we will be witnessing, hopefully now or soon, is these renegotiations of what is going to happen in virtual spaces. And I'm very much looking forward to rethinking a lot of the systems and structures that we implement in game design to allow for these sorts of negotiations, to allow for people to bring their own rule set, to allow for people to bring their own concepts and then negotiate those concepts within spaces that we provide, and not have them just navigate predefined concepts in spaces and try to learn what we intended to tell them, but have it be open and something where people actually have to talk to each other and find their own rules and discuss their own rules, so that these virtual spaces that we create can actually be spaces that we can hang out together and that we can fill with all of the things that we want to do and have a good time, and maybe even have like theatrical experiences in these sorts of spaces.
Okay, so welcome back to the Q&A session of Friedrich Kirschner's talk, where I'll have now the pleasure to talk with him in person and discuss your questions that you raised in the live chat. So I think, yeah, let's get started with the first question. The social element is very important in your experiences. So how crucial is the player's body, the audience's body in your designs? Is it vital?
So there's like a before and after, no? Like, I think one of the things that we're trying to figure out is what other channels of communication we could add to give you a similar sense of immediacy, or like, to get to actually communicate about something that is bigger than just the things that are shown. But beforehand, yeah, the body is like super important, even for the things that we're doing at Ars Electronica right now. The player's body is kind of like in space, and then also towards the other players is a super important part of communication. And the more you shut that off, the harder it becomes to communicate. And I think you can play with that. There's an interesting space there to explore. And I think it's really important to start exploring these spaces so that we can do a better job to structure communication channels, but also playful channels beyond just trying to do like a representation, like a video representation, which we have now. Like everybody's doing Zoom, we're doing live streaming. There's like, people's bodies, people's faces, but they're not really doing the same thing than what they're doing when you're in the same room together.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So one question that came to my mind when I saw your presentation, and you showed several experience examples where people work together, where you have these complex processes. And I asked myself, how do you playtest these things? Or how do you balance these things? Or what is your design approach?
Well, the answer I would tell my students would be a lot, like you playtest a lot. In practice, there's a lot more math behind a lot of these things that you would think from like experiencing them. And I think one of the key ingredients is to have a good understanding of the roles that you want people to play, and try to make sure that the concept that people have of like what a police officer would be like, or what a construction worker would be like, or what a doctor would be like, that these concepts align with the things that they're actually doing, with the objects that they have at hand, that they can use to enact their roles and their concepts. And then I think the other thing that is really, that makes it interesting to do participatory performances like that is to make sure that then these concepts are where the actual conflicts start. So it's not necessarily like hard-coded rules in like a system where you have to get 100 points, or you have to get, I don't know, turn this lamp green in order to win, but it's like trying to be a doctor in a situation where your concept of what a doctor is trying to do is being challenged. And not by a system or a structure or like an artist trying to challenge your concepts, but by other people that also have concepts on how people should operate or how specific roles work within society. And I think that is really important, to have these like people on the same level discussing with each other. I feel is oftentimes much more fruitful and much more interesting for everybody involved, because we have noticed that the audiences are super knowledgeable about so many things. And it's really interesting to then see them challenge each other, much more so than us being like the people that have researched into super complex things for like 4 weeks, and then we're like, hey, let's tell you how these things work. I mean, that would seem like super weird. And so for us, it's really important to make sure that we give a playing space where people can challenge these their own assumptions, and also extend the assumptions that we had, so that we don't pretend to know how things work.
So one question that is related to that, so you mentioned the role of the audience. They can take different roles. How would you describe the role of the designer? So is it an observer, is it maybe a researcher, an artist, or maybe just tech support in some situations? Or
I think that depends. I think there's also a wide range, and I was hoping that some of the videos would show the range of the things that we're doing. So usually the artists are the ones that invite people in, and that is a really important step, that you need to speak out an invitation. And within that speaking out the invitation, I think you already prepare the space that people go into, and you already project like what people can do within that space. And so that is like maybe the most important thing. And that also defines the role that you have. Like, do you facilitate? Are you there if somebody has questions? Do you also bring in ideas? Like, for example, if you are a game master, we play with friends, we play this tabletop role-playing game called Tales from the Loop. And there's one person who just sets up a scene, and then it's the other people who actually act out the scene. It's a bit like improv theater. And then that can be something that you can do, and you can throw in an idea, you could do this. And then people start realizing what their activity space could be. And then we tried to make sure that we're not tech support. So we had a bunch of performances where people were like, yeah, but I could just unplug the computer. And we're like, yeah, I mean, if that is what you want to do, and if we've done our job correctly, it doesn't work all the time. A lot of times the computer needs to run, and we ask people to not unplug them. But if we've done our job correctly, the consequences for the other people playing with you should be the reason why you don't want to unplug the computer. Or you do unplug the computer, but then there are consequences, and it's not like everything stops, but it's like this system now doesn't exist anymore, and how do the other players react to that?
Yeah, I think you answered the following question quite nicely, because I had this question in mind. So how you cope with this high degree of autonomy of the people, especially in situations where people try to disturb or even have some kind of a destructive, or can even destroy the experience. So if I understood it correctly, you mentioned that, so to say, the collective more or less moderates this kind of behavior, or that it's not doesn't have the big impact, so this kind of social pressure from the outside? Or
I think it's, well, there's a lot to say about people who partake in theatrical experiences to disrupt them, and especially in Austria and in Germany, we have right-wing groups that come to experiences like these to specifically disrupt them, and I don't think that there's a design way to deal with that. And it had happened to colleagues of ours, and there's actually a lot of talks and discussions about how you deal with people who come to your performances because they have a political right-wing agenda that they want to perform, and you give them a stage. So that, I think, would be a longer discussion. But I think part of playing, and this is also my experience from playing video games, is that exploring the possibility space is something that is really interesting to a lot of people, like trying to find out, like, how far can you go, what can you do? And I think having these sorts of possibilities in mind when you design, and also giving people the possibility to act and giving them agency, so far has rewarded us with people being much more interested in generating interesting situations than in just disrupting everything. So we have had the experience that the more agency you give people, the more they come up with super interesting things that will then happen. Like, they will suddenly create newspapers. They will start a police force. They will do things that you wouldn't have imagined would happen before. And I think that is also, that is kind of one of the core things that we're trying to achieve. It's not that we try to create like a simulation of an economic system to tell everybody that capitalism is bad. I think most people know that capitalism in its current form has, let's say, issues. But it's more like, let's discuss what you can do, and let's give a space where you can try out maybe different forms of economic structures, or where you can, just fulfill your fantasy of robbing the bank and giving it all to the people, and then see how that plays out, and not stop it there, and then have a happy ending, but like see how, would people still go to work afterwards? And I think these were experiences that were actually happening within small, like, poetic sketches. But it's super interesting to then see how people discuss what was going on afterwards.
Thank you. Very interesting. I think we could keep this discussion hours for hours.
Sure.
But unfortunately we're out of time. So thank you for your questions, Friedrich, and it was very nice to have you here. A short announcement. We'll now have a break until 13:30. And then we'll continue our real-time panel with 2 talks from Total Refusal and Johannes Pfeiffer. So until then, see you. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.